All right. So this was 5 days ago, and it's supposed to prove predestination, or like the Calvinist view of free will or something. But let's look at it. Hmm. So let's start from the very beginning. Is God eternal? Yes. Does God know everything? Yes. And denying either of those would be quote unquote heresy. I love it when Protestants want to use that word heresy. Like, doesn't heresy imply a juridical body to declare something heretical? To, to, to declare someone outside the visible body, outside the. That's like, how can you be excommunicated or declared a heretic if there's no boundaries, there's no defining boundaries of the church to begin with? Who's declaring heresy? You? Um, I don't know. But anyway, does God change? No. Therefore, God has always known everything, including the future. True. Take any contingent event. Has God always known it? Yes. Did God determine it? Um, did God determine whether it would or not? Jesus, speak English. Did God determine whether it would or not occur? Speak English. Like, that's the problem with these slides is they're so lazy. Like, what is this like goofy Comic Sans like little pictograph? It's just goofy, bro. Like, did God determine whether it would or not occur? You should say, did God determine whether it would occur or not? That's proper English. And the goofy bow tie, bro. Like, I don't know what to say. There's a reason no one takes you seriously. Um, with the like mustache, that's kind of like weird and creepy. I don't know. Okay, but did God determine that it would occur? No, because knowing something is not the same as determining it. Then something outside of God determined that it would occur. And this is lazy language. He's using the word something outside of God. You know, the word ontologically exists. Something that is not ontologically God determined that it would occur. It's like, so he can't even use good language. He can't even like condense his point into something intelligible. Instead, he has this like something outside of God, dude. Like, what does that mean, bro? That's so vague. Just say something that is not ontologically God. There's a proper terminology for this. Something outside of God. Just say something that is not God determined that it would occur. Yes. Then something outside of God. You need to say then this thing outside of God has always been in God's mind. So yes, and when you say in God's mind, you mean as an idea. Yes. Um, when you say something outside of God has always been in his mind, that doesn't make that thing eternal. Just because God can have an eternal idea, like God could have an idea about a person, or he can have knowledge. Just because the knowledge is eternal doesn't make the thing eternal. That would make everything eternal, and therefore, like, wait. So he's saying if something, so if you say something has always been, he means the idea of the thing. He doesn't literally mean the thing has always been in God's mind. He means the idea or the knowledge of the thing. So that would be a contradiction. So if something outside of God was always in his mind, then yeah, that would. Um, you can't say no if you're talking about the idea, which I'm assuming is what he's. But the language here is so vague and mismatch. It's hard to tell exactly what he means. When you're talking about like complex theological terms, you should be using proper language, right? Theological language. Then something outside of God is eternal. That just doesn't follow. So if I have an idea about a thing, so God having an idea about me, That doesn't make something outside of God eternal. That just means God has an eternal idea about something. That doesn't make the thing real. So this last step here where he goes, then something outside of God has always been in God's mind. That's true. Something outside of God, let's say me, has always been in God's mind. That's true. God always knew I was going to be here. He's always had the knowledge about me and what I would do. That's congruent. Then something outside of God is eternal. What? No, that doesn't follow. That would make me eternal. So I don't see. So he's trying to draw like a logical entailment, but this last one just has nothing to do with the previous one, because one's an idea about a guy that doesn't have anything to do. God's knowledge about something has nothing to do with the ontological status of the thing God knows about. Just because God knows I'm going to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C eternally, that doesn't make me eternal, obviously. So then something outside of God has always been in God's mind. Then something outside of God is eternal? No. So how's that a contradiction? So he's trying to. So if I say no, he's saying it's a contradiction, but it just straight up isn't. Yes, if something outside of God was eternal, that would be heresy. That's correct. But this part where he says it's a contradiction, he just doesn't establish how it's a contradiction. I can show you how it's not a contradiction, because let's take these last three. Something outside of God determined it would occur. Yes, that's human beings having causal power, having agency, free will. So that's the answer to one. Two, something outside of God has always been in his mind. So I don't know, like me, I've always been in God's mind as an idea. He's always had an idea of me, knowledge of me in his mind, but I'm not literally in his mind. I'm not in hanging out. Hey guys, I'm in God's mind, chilling over here until I'm born. Like an idea, God having an idea or knowledge of a thing is not the same thing as that thing existing and having its ontology bound up in God's mind or knowledge. So, like, God can have knowledge about me right now on earth. That doesn't mean I'm up there in God's mind. There's another version of me up there in God's mind or something. There's not another me. Ideas are impressions. They're not the real thing. So something outside of God has always been in his mind. Yeah, the idea, the knowledge, that is proprietary to God, but that's not me. And something outside of God is eternal. No, I'm not eternal. The idea of me and the knowledge of me is eternal, but that's part of God's mind. So that's just part of God. So the mistake is at the very end. So redeem Zoomer's thing. Nobody's questioning this first part. The last part is really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, where he thinks that if you say no to 8, that leads to a contradiction, but he doesn't establish how there's a contradiction at all. And it's mostly due to the fact that his language and the meaning behind these sentences is ambiguous. But as I just walked you through, 6, 7, and 8 don't lead to a contradiction. Let's do it one more time. Let's take Billy Bob. We have a man named Billy Bob and everything about his life. So is God eternal? Yes. Does God know everything, including what Billy Bob is going to do? Yes. Does God change? No. Therefore, has God always known everything, including the future? Yes. Take Billy Bob Thornton. Does God know what he's going to do throughout his whole life? Yes. Did God determine that? No. So we go down here. Then something outside of God, someone who is not God, something that is not God, determined it. Yes. Billy Bob, through free will. Then something outside of God, something that's not God, is always in God's mind. Yes. We have the idea of Billy Bob Thornton. The knowledge about Billy Bob Thornton's life is in God's mind. as an idea, not as he's literally a ghost up in hanging out in God's mind as some like mind creature, right? It's an idea. I can have an idea about a flower. That doesn't mean the flower is literally in my mind, right? Common sense. Then something outside of God is eternal. No, the flower is not eternal. Just because I have knowledge or a conception or an idea of a flower doesn't make the flower eternal. Common sense, right? So why does he? So he thinks this leads to a contradiction through 7 and 8. They somehow contradict each other, or maybe it's 6, 7, and 8 is where he doesn't even show where the contradiction occurs. So it's ambiguous. And it's really just, this is just being lazy. This is a lazy, disorganized chart. He uses lazy, vague, ambiguous language that is not specific enough. It's not academic enough. It's not theological enough to really contain any substance. Because who knows exactly what these words mean? Something outside of God. What does that mean? You mean something that's... What does outside of God mean? You mean ontologically. You mean something that is not God, his essence, or his energies. That's what you mean, right? You mean something that's not a person of the Trinity. You mean, does that include angels? Does that include the world? Is the world outside of God? Because if God is providentially governing over creation, does that make creation outside of God? Well, not entirely, because God's will makes the seconds pass and he's holding the fabric of reality together. So in a way, it's not outside of God. It's not out of his influence and control. God can do whatever he wants. He's omnipotent. But does that mean that the world is God? Does that mean that something called the world exists outside of God's mind and is eternal? Are we saying there's an eternal world? No. So it's really just 7 and 8. He thinks they lead to a contradiction. They don't. And we can use the example of Billy Bob. Then Billy Bob is outside of God. That's true. He's not God. But he exists in God's mind. He has always existed in God's mind. That's true. God has eternal knowledge of what Billy Bob is going to do, but Billy Bob is not God. And God's idea of Billy Bob is not the same thing as Billy Bob himself. Then something outside of God is eternal. No. The idea and the knowledge of Billy Bob is eternal, but that is a work in energy and operation that is part of God. That's in God's mind. That's God. And you just, I don't know. So this just seems like, this is why you don't be a Protestant, guys, because, I don't know, just like the standard of, argument is just so low with these Protestants. And like, is Redeem Zoomer going to make any effort to like clean this up or address some of the counters, or is he just going to blow past it and do a bunch of sophistry? Like, here's what they always do. They always do sophistry and word games. They're like, well, you see, the idea is actually part of God, or like it's what's the difference between the main and the idea? They just like pose these like retarded hypotheticals where they just mostly rely on the ambiguity and the nonsensicalness and the poor construct of their sentences. It just looks absolutely goofy. So on one level, it's like ambiguous. You're like, I don't know exactly what you mean by these words, and so he can always Mont and Bailey and run away and change the position and hide in the obscurity of the language. But at least the way I pointed it out, there's not an obvious contradiction. So he thinks there's a necessary entailment to a contradiction. There just isn't. Billy Bob Thornton determined that it would occur. Billy Bob Thornton, the guy. Something outside of God is in his mind. Yep, he can have a divine idea. But the idea is not the same as the guy himself. So we have a guy determining it. We have a eternal divine idea of the guy in God's mind. And then we have a non-eternal guy. So for whatever reason, Zoomer thinks that because somehow that the idea or eternal knowledge of a guy is the same thing as a guy being eternal. No. I don't even know what that would do. Like, how would that help your position? Like, think about it this way: if you just removed everything else, doesn't even have anything to do with free will. He just basically jumps from something outside of God determined that it would occur to something outside of God has always been in God's mind. Which is like, okay, so if you think a divine idea is just equatable to the thing in question, what does that actually have to do with free will? You just have a messed up idea of divine knowledge or the divine mind. He thinks that ideas of things are the same as the thing themselves, and that would therefore make the thing eternal, which would be a heresy, which is correct. Maybe I'm dumb. I don't see how this. I don't really see how steps 1 to 6 relate to 7 and 8. Because it seems like you don't even need free will or determinism to arrive at the contradiction. The contradiction seems to be just 6, 7, and 8. Maybe even 7 and 8. So take any idea X. Just let's clean this up. Let's take any idea X. Has idea X always been in God's mind? And is it outside of God? Yes. Then something outside of God is eternal because it's always been in his mind. Yes. Oh, heresy. No contradiction. Okay, so now God can't have eternal foreknowledge or can't have any eternal idea. So God is not eternal because therefore anything that's in his mind as an idea would also be eternal, and therefore that'd be a heresy. This seems to have nothing to do with. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, take just 7 and 8. Something outside of God has always been in God's mind. Yes, me. God knows everything. He's omniscient. He's basically thinking that omniscience means that everything that God knows about and is omniscient about is also eternal because God has eternal knowledge of these things, which is just ridiculous. He just doesn't know what omniscient means, or not even that. I actually have no clue. Like, maybe he means something completely different by this because it just makes no sense overall. Am I crazy? Like, this just seems completely logical. Let me know what you guys think. Maybe, he'll explain it. But I get frustrated at the ambiguous something outside of God. Like, what does that mean? You mean something that is not ontologically God. Like a flower. A flower is not God. And calling a flower eternal would be a heresy. But God can have a eternal idea, an eternal knowledge about the flower. It doesn't make the flower eternal, and then therefore a heresy. Like, if the contradiction is established simply with 6, 7, and 8, it has nothing to do with whether or not something is determined. It just has everything to do with whether or not God has an eternal divine idea or foreknowledge about something. It has nothing to do with predestination. So I don't know. But anyway, I'm done. Let me know what you think. Low IQ confirmed. Redeem Zoomer. Anyway, I have to go. I will see you all later. Bye-bye.